I never imagined that, at my age, I would be standing at the edge of my daughter's doorway, hearing her husband raise his voice at me, while my own daughter stayed silent. I had always believed that love, especially a mother's love, was enough to hold a family together. But life has a way of showing us truths we never wanted to see. It happened on a gray, rainy afternoon, the kind of day when the sky feels heavy and even your heart begins to copy the clouds. I had gone to visit my daughter, Anna, because she had sounded tired on the phone the night before. There was something in her voice, a tremble, a pause, something only a mother would notice. So I brought a pot of warm soup, the kind she loved since childhood, and I walked the familiar path to her house. I had been there so many times before, always welcomed with hugs and laughter, always feeling like I was stepping into a place that still remembered me. But that day, the moment I stepped inside, the air felt different, cold, tense, as if the walls were listening. I had barely taken 2 steps into the living room when my son-in-law, Mark, walked in. His face was tight, his jaw clenched, eyes full of something I had never seen from him before. Not kindness, not respect, something sharper, something guarded. He didn't greet me. He didn't even look at the soup I held. Instead, he said very clearly, "Don't interfere in our home." Just like that, as if I were a stranger, as if I were the problem. I felt my heart drop, but I didn't let the hurt show. I simply nodded. I have lived long enough to know that reacting in anger only makes the wound deeper. But the strange thing, the painful thing, was that my daughter just stood there, quiet, looking down at her hands as if she wasn't sure which world she belonged to, mine or his. I placed the soup on the table gently, trying not to make a sound. I told myself to stay calm, to breathe slowly. I wanted to ask Anna what was happening, but I could see from her red eyes that something had been happening long before I arrived. I told myself to leave, to walk away and let them handle their life, but fate had a different plan. Because only 2 hours later, the police knocked on their door. And in that moment, the same man who told me not to interfere was the one hiding behind me, hiding behind. I think to understand what happened that day, you need to know who we were before everything changed. Because families don't fall apart in a single moment. It happens slowly, gently, like a thread fraying over time, until one day you realize the whole cloth has come undone. My daughter, Anna, was always a quiet child, not shy, just gentle. She was the kind of girl who carried her books close to her chest, who whispered "thank you," even when people didn't deserve it, who cried in silence because she hated disturbing anyone. When she was young, she used to sit in the kitchen with me while I cooked. She would swing her legs on the stool and ask a million questions about life. Why do people hurt each other, Mom? Why do families stop talking? Why do some people change after marriage? I never had the perfect answers. I only knew how to teach her kindness, hoping the world would give some back to her. She met Mark when she was 26. I remember the first time she brought him home. He walked in with a bouquet of flowers and a nervous smile. He thanked me for making dinner and complimented everything, even the old wallpaper I had always been meaning to replace. He was polite, charming, soft-spoken, the kind of man any mother would feel safe leaving her daughter with. I will admit this now, although it hurts. I liked him. I trusted him. I wanted Anna to be happy, and he looked at her in a way that made me believe he truly cared. They married a year later. A small ceremony, simple and warm. I remember standing there, looking at Anna in her dress, thinking, this is it. My daughter will have the love she deserves. For a while, everything seemed fine. But life does not reveal its storms early. Sometimes the sky stays clear until the last second. Their home was only 15 minutes from mine, so I visited often in the beginning, not to interfere, only to bring groceries sometimes or help Anna with laundry when she worked late. She always hugged me at the door, thanking me over and over for the smallest things. But with time, something began to shift. First, it was small changes. Visits became shorter. Phone calls ended quicker. The hugs felt tighter, not in affection, but in apology, as if she was saying sorry without words. Then I noticed she stopped calling me first. I was always the one reaching out. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" I would ask. "Nothing, Mom, just tired." "Is Mark treating you well?" "Yes, of course, he's just stressed." Stressed. That became the excuse for everything. Still, I tried not to worry. Young couples need space. They need to find their rhythm, their balance. I told myself not to intrude, not to hover. After all, I remembered how my own mother had been. Too present, too strong, too loud. I didn't want to repeat that mistake, but even if I tried to give space, the distance kept growing. One afternoon, I knocked on their door only to hear Mark say, "Through the wood." Not today. Just those two words, not rude, not loud, but cold. Cold enough that I stepped back from the door, wondering if I had imagined the tone. Anna didn't come to the door. She didn't call me later. She didn't explain. And I didn't push. I should have. I know that now. Sometimes silence is not respect. It is the first sign of losing someone. The weeks turned into months, and I started seeing less of my daughter than ever before. I would pass by their home sometimes and see her sitting on the porch alone, arms wrapped around her body as if she were cold even in the sunlight. There were shadows under her eyes. Her face looked thinner. Her smiles were soft but empty. I worried. A mother always worries. But every time I tried to talk, she brushed it aside. "I'm fine, Mom. Really? Don't worry about me." But I did. I worried every day. The night before everything happened, the night before I heard Mark tell me not to interfere, Anna had called me. It was a short call. Her voice was shaking. "Mom, do you think people can grow apart?" "Yes," I whispered. "Sometimes." "And do you think it's possible to fix it?" "It depends. On love, on effort, on honesty." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I miss you." I closed my eyes. "I miss you too, sweetheart." "I'll see you tomorrow, okay?" "Yes. Come by if you can." But the next day when I arrived at her house, she didn't open the door with a smile. She didn't hug me. She didn't even look at me properly. She stood there with red eyes and trembling fingers, and Mark stood behind her, arms crossed, jaw set. That was the moment he said the sentence that would echo in my heart for weeks afterward. "Don't interfere in our home." Such a simple sentence, such a familiar idea. Families say it all the time. But the way he said it, the way my daughter stayed silent behind him, it was like someone closing a door inside my chest. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply placed the soup on the table, nodded, and told Anna I would leave soon. But inside, something felt terribly wrong. The tension in that house was not the tension of tired people. It wasn't the exhaustion of busy days or long weeks. It was fear. Quiet fear. The kind of fear people don't show to visitors unless they forget the visitor is still family. I saw it in Anna's eyes before she looked away. I saw it again when I touched her arm and she flinched. Not in pain, in guilt. She wasn't protecting him. She was protecting me. But I didn't know that yet. Not fully. Not until the knock on the door came. Not until the police stepped inside. Not until the moment Mark, the same man who told me not to interfere, hid behind me like a frightened child. But that moment belongs to a later chapter in this story. For now, all you need to understand is this. The storm didn't begin when the police arrived. It began long before, in the quiet moments, in the unsaid words, in the little shadows that slowly darkened their home. And I walked straight into that storm without knowing what waited inside. After I left the soup on their table that day, I walked home slowly, letting the rain fall on me. I didn't mind the cold. Sometimes a little rain helps a person think. It washes the noise away and leaves only the truth sitting inside your heart. All the way home, I replayed Mark's words in my mind. Don't interfere in our home. There was a firmness in his voice, a kind of territorial pride, as if the house belonged only to him, as if Anna was only something he owned, not someone he loved. And the part that hurt the most was the way Anna lowered her eyes, unable to say a single word in my defense. A mother knows her child's silence. There is the silence of peace, the silence of thought, and the silence of fear. Anna's silence was fear. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept pacing around the kitchen, touching the edges of the counter, checking the stove knobs, folding the dish towel again and again. Anything to quiet the unease that had settled inside me. When I finally sat down, I whispered to myself, maybe I'm imagining it. Maybe they just had an argument. Maybe I came at the wrong moment. But deep down, I knew better. Mothers always know. Still, I didn't want to cause trouble. I didn't want to step into their marriage or make things worse. The last thing I wanted was to be the reason my daughter suffered more. So I waited. I waited for her to call. I waited for her to say she needed help. I waited for a sign. None came. A few days passed, each one heavier than the last. Finally, one evening, she sent a short message. "Hi, Mom, are you okay?" Just that, nothing more. I replied immediately, "I'm fine. Are you okay?" No answer. I stared at the screen until the message time turned from minutes into hours. It didn't take long for my fear to become certainty. Something was wrong inside that house. I decided to visit again, not to interfere, just to see her face, to feel her energy, to sense what was happening. A mother doesn't always need words to understand her child. Sometimes a single glance is enough. When I arrived, the house was quiet, too quiet. I knocked gently. No one answered. I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. I was about to turn away when I heard a small sound from inside. Not footsteps, not talking. Something like a drawer being closed in a hurry. Then the door opened slightly. Anna stood there, forcing a smile. "Mom, you didn't tell me you were coming." "I wanted to check on you," I said softly. She looked over her shoulder before stepping aside. "Okay, come in, but just for a little while. Mark is sleeping." "Sleeping? At 6 in the evening?" I nodded, pretending not to notice her nervousness. But as soon as I walked in, I felt it. The air was thick, heavy, as if the house itself was tired. I looked around and saw things I hadn't seen before. The curtains were always open when I visited. Now they were half drawn. The table had receipts scattered on it. Not usual for her. The trash bin was full. There was a faint smell of something burnt in the air. And Anna's hands, they were trembling slightly as she poured me tea. "Are you sure you're okay?" I asked gently. "Yes, just tired." "Anna." She looked away. Her throat tightened. Her eyes filled, just for a moment. But then she blinked quickly and forced a smile. "I'm fine, Mom." She wasn't. In that moment, I wanted to take her hand and pull her out of that house. I wanted to tell her to come home with me, even for a night. But she seemed so fragile, so unsure. I didn't want to push too hard, so I sat quietly with her for a while, sipping tea neither of us tasted. Then something happened. A sound, a small one, but sharp enough to break through everything. It came from the hallway, the sound of a door opening and closing again, not gently, not slowly, but with a kind of roughness that made my daughter jump. A moment later, Mark walked into the room. He didn't greet me, he didn't smile, he didn't even look surprised to see me. Instead, his eyes went straight to Anna. "What's she doing here?" he asked, as if I weren't even in the room. I invited her for a few minutes." "You invited her?" His voice was low, but hard. "Without telling me?" Anna flinched. "I didn't think—" "That's the problem," he snapped. "You never think." That was enough for me. I stood up. "Mark, I said softly. I didn't mean to disturb anything. I only came to check on Anna. He finally turned toward me, his expression controlled but cold. You don't need to check on anything. She's fine. This is our home and we handle our own issues. You don't need to interfere. The same sentence again. Almost the exact same tone. Anna looked like she was shrinking inside herself. I saw her fingers tighten around her cup, not in anger, but in fear. Fear of what he might say, fear of what he might do later, fear of what my presence might cause. I wanted to say something strong, something protective. But Anna's eyes begged me not to, so I took a slow breath and said, I'll go. Anna, I'll call you later, sweetheart. She didn't answer. She just nodded with her head down. When I stepped outside, the wind felt colder than usual. I walked to my car slowly, but before I opened the door, I looked back at the house. In the window, I could see Anna. She stood there, staring at me with a kind of sadness I hadn't seen since she was a child. That was when I realized something important. She wasn't just afraid of him. She was afraid for me. Over the next week, things got worse. Anna stopped answering my calls entirely. Messages were read but not replied to. I went to her house twice, but no one answered, even though I could hear movement inside. I didn't know what to do anymore. Should I push? Should I give space? Should I call someone? Should I pretend nothing was wrong? Every possible choice felt like the wrong one. And when a mother feels helpless, that is the deepest pain. Then one night, something woke me from sleep. It wasn't a sound, not a dream, not a message, just a feeling, a heavy pull in my chest, a whisper inside me saying, go, go now. I trust those whispers. Every mother does. I didn't even change my clothes. I grabbed my coat and keys and drove straight to their house. The lights were on. The door was slightly open. The living room was a mess, not chaotic, but disrupted. A chair out of place, a broken glass, a pillow on the floor, and Anna sitting at the edge of the couch, her face pale. Anna, I whispered, stepping toward her. Before she could answer, Mark came out of the hallway. His shirt was wrinkled, and something in his eyes made my heart drop. What are you doing here? He asked sharply. I came to see my daughter. We're fine, he said, too quickly. I turned to Anna. Sweetheart, tell me the truth. For the first time, her eyes filled with tears. Mom, she whispered, I'm so tired. And then she broke. She cried quietly, trying to hide it, but she couldn't. And Mark stepped forward as if he wanted to stop me from approaching her. Don't interfere, he said again. Firmer this time, but before he could say another word, there was a sudden loud knock on the door, a heavy official knock. Mark froze, Anna froze, I froze, and then, from the other side of the door, a voice said, Police, open up. In that moment, everything changed. Mark's entire expression collapsed, his shoulders dropped, his face went pale, and then, unbelievably, he stepped behind me. The same woman he told not to interfere. The same woman he tried to push away. He hid like a scared child. Anna looked at him with shock. I looked at him with disbelief, and the police were still knocking. But what they said next, what they came for, why they were there, that part of the story comes later, because the truth behind that knock was darker than anything I expected. The knocking grew louder, more urgent, more unmistakable. Police, open the door. I felt Anna's breath catch in her chest. She wiped her tears quickly with the back of her sleeve, trying to make herself look composed, but nothing could hide the tremble in her hands. Mark stood behind me so closely that I could feel his breath on my shoulder. His earlier bravado, his harsh voice, his cold authority, all of it evaporated in an instant. What remained was fear. Raw, unfiltered fear. I looked at him slowly, but he avoided my eyes. I didn't know why he was hiding. I didn't know what he had done. But I knew this. No innocent man hides behind the woman he tried to silence. "Are you going to answer the door?" I whispered. He shook his head violently. Anna stepped forward, her voice barely audible. "Mom, I think I should—" Another knock, harder than the first, cut her words. "Police! Open immediately!" Anna froze, staring at the door as if she were looking at her own fate, standing on the other side. I placed my hand gently on her arm. "Sweetheart, let me open it." She nodded, silent. I walked toward the door slowly. I wasn't afraid, but my heart was heavy, heavy with the weight of not knowing what was coming next. When I opened the door, 2 officers stood there, rain dripping from their jackets. The night behind them was dark, with the streetlights flickering softly, as if even the world outside sensed something was wrong. "Ma'am," the taller officer said, "we received a call from this address." A call? My eyes widened slightly. Anna hadn't called, Mark definitely hadn't, and I hadn't. Who then? Anna stepped forward, her voice shaky. "A call? For what reason?" Before they could answer, Mark spoke from behind me, his voice small, weak, unlike anything I had heard from him before. We didn't call anyone." The officers exchanged a look. "Ma'am," the shorter officer said to Anna, choosing his words carefully, "we received a disturbance report. A neighbor heard yelling. They said it sounded concerning." I felt Anna shrink into herself. She wasn't the type to yell. Even when she cried quietly. The taller officer glanced inside the house, noticing the broken glass on the floor, the scattered items, the tension hanging in the air like smoke. "Is everything all right here?" he asked. Anna opened her mouth, then closed it again, struggling for words. "Yes," Mark said quickly. "We're fine. It was just a misunderstanding." The officer raised an eyebrow. Then his eyes drifted to Anna. Her red eyes, her pale face, the faint bruise on her wrist she had tried to hide by pulling down her sleeve. "Ma'am," he said gently, "are you safe?" Anna's lips trembled. She didn't answer, and that silence was enough. The officers stepped inside slowly but firmly. "Sir," one of them said to Mark, "we need you to step aside and answer a few questions." Mark's voice cracked. "Is this necessary?" "We're fine," I said. He tried to step forward as if to assert himself again, but the officer stood between him and Anna, and Mark retreated. He moved back until he was almost pressed against me, as if I were a shield he could hide behind. The irony stung. The same man who told me not to interfere was now gripping the back of my coat like a frightened child. The officer gestured calmly. "Sir, come with me to the kitchen." Mark obeyed, reluctantly, with small, hesitant steps. When he disappeared around the corner, Anna released a breath she must have been holding for hours. The second officer turned to her softly. "Ma'am, please tell me what's going on." Anna looked at me, not at the officer. Her eyes were pleading for permission to speak, permission to finally break the silence she had been suffocating under. I nodded. She sat down on the couch slowly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her voice was soft, fragile. "It's been building up for a long time," she said. "Longer than I want to admit." The officer sat across from her. "I want you to take your time. You're safe right now." Those words, "you're safe," made her shoulders drop as if a weight had been lifted just by hearing them. Anna swallowed hard. "Mark wasn't always like this," she began. "He used to be gentle, careful. He used to laugh with me, help me with chores. He used to listen. But after we got married—" She shook her head. "Something changed." Her voice cracked. "At first, it was small things. He didn't want me seeing friends. Then he didn't want me calling my mom too much. Then he wanted to choose what I wore, where I went, even how long I stayed at the grocery store." She paused, wiping a tear. "He said it was because he loved me, because the world was dangerous, because couples should be united. I believed him. I wanted our marriage to work." She looked at me then, eyes full of guilt. "And I'm sorry, Mom. I started pulling away from you. I didn't want you to see his temper. I didn't want you to think he was hurting me. I thought I could fix things if I kept you out of it." My heart tightened. I reached over and held her hand. She held on tightly, as if my hand was the only stable thing she had left. "What happened tonight?" the officer asked gently. Anna closed her eyes for a moment. "Tonight? He got angry because I answered a call from a coworker, just a normal call, work-related. He didn't like that I spoke to another man. He shouted. He threw the glass at the wall. And then," her voice dropped, "he pushed me." My breath caught. Anna unclasped her hands and hesitated, then slowly pulled up her sleeve. A bruise, dark, fresh, shaped like fingers. The officer's expression changed instantly, calm but firm. "Anna," I whispered, tears burning my eyes. "Why didn't you tell me?" She shook her head. "Because I didn't want you to come. Because I didn't want him to turn on you because he already thought you were interfering." I placed my hand on her cheek. "Sweetheart, I would walk through fire for you." She smiled weakly, tears falling. Then we heard voices coming from the kitchen. The officer with Mark was raising his tone slightly, not angry but authoritative. "Sir, I'm asking you again, did you put your hands on your wife?" Mark's answer was muffled, but we heard the desperation in his tone. "I didn't mean to. I was stressed. It wasn't what it looked like." His voice cracked. Then something hit the counter. A pan, maybe, or a pot. The officer stepped closer to the living room. "Ma'am," he said to Anna, "do you want to file a report? We can help you. We can escort him out tonight if necessary." Mark stepped out of the kitchen at that moment, eyes wide, chest rising and falling rapidly. "You can't do this," he said to Anna. "You can't tell them these things. You're my wife." Anna's voice was barely above a whisper. "But I'm not your possession." Mark's face twisted, not in anger but in panic. The panic of someone losing control. "You told her to stop seeing me," I said quietly, stepping forward. "You cut her off from friends. You isolated her. You hurt her. That's not love." He looked at me with a mixture of fear and resentment. "You're the one who ruined everything," he said. "You kept coming. You kept interfering." I nodded slowly. "And now I understand why you didn't want me here." The officer moved closer to Mark. "Sir, please step aside." But Mark didn't move. Instead, he did something that surprised all of us. He stepped behind me again, not out of anger, not out of defiance, out of fear, as if I was the safest person in the entire room. The irony of it made the moment heavier. A man who pushed me away, who raised his voice to me, who tried to isolate my daughter from me, was now hiding behind the very person he tried to remove from their lives. The officer took a deep breath. "Sir, we need you to cooperate right now." Mark's voice cracked. "Please, please don't take me. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I just lost control." The officer stood firm. "That's exactly why we're here." Anna covered her mouth, tears spilling again, and I stood there, feeling the ground shift beneath my feet. We had reached the breaking point, the moment where silence could no longer protect anyone, the moment the truth stood in front of all of us, demanding to be seen. But what happened next? What Anna decided? What the police ultimately did? That part changed our family forever. The room felt painfully quiet after Mark's final plea. It was the kind of silence that doesn't soothe, the kind that exposes everything. No more excuses. No more pretending. No more holding the pieces together just to avoid breaking. Anna sat on the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her shoulders trembled, but her face held something new. Not strength, not yet, but readiness. A quiet readiness to stop being afraid. The officer stood beside her, waiting. He didn't push, didn't rush her, didn't force an answer. He understood something important. Sometimes the hardest decisions require silence first. "Ma'am," he said gently, "you don't have to make a big decision tonight, but you do have to choose what happens in the next few hours. Your safety matters. Your voice matters." Her safety. Her voice. Two things Mark had tried so hard to take from her. Anna inhaled shakily and wiped her face with trembling hands. I don't want him arrested," she said softly. Mark let out a breath of relief behind me, but too soon. Anna continued, her voice still fragile but steadier. "But I don't want him in this house tonight." The relief on Mark's face vanished. He took a step forward instinctively, not aggressively, just out of desperation. But the officer raised a hand gently. "Sir, please stay where you are." Mark looked at Anna as if the floor had vanished beneath him. "You're sending me away. From my own home," he whispered. Anna nodded, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. "Just for tonight." "For tonight?" he repeated, his voice cracking. "Anna, I said I was sorry. I told you I didn't mean—" "This isn't about meaning it," she whispered, her voice breaking in the middle. "It's about what you did." Her words hung in the air like a truth that could no longer be avoided. He opened his mouth again, but no sound came. He wasn't used to consequences. He wasn't used to Anna saying no. He wasn't used to losing control. One of the officers approached him gently. "Sir, we need you to gather a few belongings. You can stay at a hotel or a relative's place for the night." Mark shook his head slowly, like someone waking up from a dream he didn't want to leave. "This is my house," he muttered. "My home. She can't do this." But he didn't move. He didn't fight. He didn't shout. The fear inside him was stronger than his anger tonight. The officer guided him toward the bedroom so he could collect his things. His footsteps were slow, heavy, filled with disbelief. And as soon as he disappeared from view, Anna let out a sob so deep it shook her entire body. I rushed to her side and wrapped my arms around her. She leaned into me the way she did when she was a child. All weight, all vulnerability, all trust. She cried into my shoulder for a long time. Not loudly, just those soft, heartbreaking tears that come from holding pain for too long. "It's okay," I whispered, stroking her hair. "You're safe now. I'm here. I'm right here." "I'm so sorry, Mom," she whispered back. "I should have told you sooner. I should have—" I placed a finger gently against her lips. "No, don't blame yourself. Love makes us endure things we should never endure." She closed her eyes and cried quietly. When Mark came out of the bedroom, a small bag in his hand, he looked exhausted. Not physically, but emotionally. He walked slowly to the door, glancing at Anna with a mixture of sadness and regret. "I didn't want this," he whispered. Anna didn't respond. She couldn't. And then his eyes shifted to me. For the first time since I had known him, he didn't look at me with annoyance or irritation. He looked at me with something else entirely. Recognition. Recognition of the role I played. Recognition of the strength he didn't expect. Recognition that the woman he tried to push away had become the only barrier between him and complete chaos. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Not to Anna, to me. And for a moment, I saw him clearly. Not as the controlling man he had become, not as the frightened man hiding behind me, but as the boy he once was, before life hardened him, before fear shaped him, before insecurity took root. But apologies don't erase bruises. The officer opened the door. Mark stepped out into the cold night, and the door closed behind him with a soft click. It didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a breath, a single breath of relief after months of suffocating. The officer stayed for a few minutes to make sure Anna was calm, explaining her options gently. She could file a report, she could request a protection order, or she could simply take time to think. "Your safety comes first," one officer said again. "Tonight, you're not alone." When they left, the house felt strangely larger, as if the walls themselves had loosened their grip. Anna and I sat together in silence. "How long has this been happening?" I asked softly. She hesitated, then whispered, "Almost a year. A year. A year of walking on eggshells, a year of hiding bruises, a year of defending him, a year of pushing me away because she was afraid of dragging me into her pain, a year of silence." My heart ached, but I didn't ask why she stayed. I already knew the answer. Love makes people believe they can fix anything. Fear makes them believe they cannot leave. "I thought if I loved him enough," she said quietly, "he would change. I thought if I stayed patient, he'd calm down. I thought it was my fault." I took her hand gently. "None of this is your fault, sweetheart." She closed her eyes. "I know that now, but I didn't know it then." Her honesty was a fragile, delicate thing, but it was the beginning of healing. I stayed with her that night. She didn't want to be alone, and I didn't want her to be alone. We made tea. We wrapped ourselves in blankets. We sat in the living room and let the silence settle around us like a soft curtain. Around midnight, she rested her head on my shoulder and whispered, "Mom, thank you for coming tonight." I kissed the top of her head. "I'll always come." She sighed, a long, shaky sigh, the kind a person releases when they finally stop pretending to be strong. "I thought he might hurt you," she said softly. "That's why I begged you not to visit so much. I didn't want him to turn all that anger toward you." I squeezed her hand. "You protected me," I said, "but you didn't have to. That was my job." She smiled weakly. "I'm not a child anymore." "You'll always be my child," I whispered. We both laughed quietly then, not because anything was funny, but because sometimes laughter is the only way to keep sadness from taking over completely. The next morning, sunlight filled the house for the first time in a long while. Anna opened the curtains, and the light fell across her face gently, highlighting something I hadn't seen in months: peace. Fragile, new peace. She made breakfast. Nothing big, just toast and eggs. But she moved with a calmness I barely recognized. When she handed me a cup of tea, her hands weren't trembling anymore. "What are you going to do?" I asked quietly. She looked down at her tea, thinking. "I'm not sure. I don't know if I want a divorce. I don't know if he can change. I don't know if I'm ready to rebuild everything alone." Then she lifted her eyes to mine. "But I know I don't want to be afraid anymore. Not of him. Not of what people think. Not of making mistakes." I nodded. "That's enough for now," I said. "Knowing what you don't want is the first step to finding what you do." She smiled again, small but real. "Will you stay with me for a few days?" she asked softly. "Of course," I said, and I meant it. Not because she needed me, although she did, but because I needed her too. I needed to see her healing. I needed to remind myself that family doesn't end when children grow up. It simply shifts, changes, evolves into something new. Mark didn't return for several days. He sent messages, long emotional messages full of apologies, promises, explanations, fear. But Anna didn't answer them. Not yet. She needed space. She needed time. She needed to hear her own voice before hearing his again. And for the first time in a long time, she was learning to listen to herself. That was the beginning of her freedom. But the real closure, the moment that brought healing, understanding, and forgiveness, came later. And that moment belongs in the final chapter of this story. A week passed before Mark returned to the house, not to move back in, not to demand anything, not to reclaim control. He came only to talk, to face the damage, to understand what his fear and insecurity had turned him into. Anna agreed to meet him on the porch, not inside the house, she wasn't ready for that, but outside in the morning light, where the air felt open and honest. I stayed inside near the window, close enough in case she needed me, but far enough to give her space. She wasn't a child anymore. She needed to fight some battles on her own. When Mark arrived, I saw immediately that something inside him had broken, not in a destructive way, but in a way that allowed humility to finally slip in. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes were tired, and his voice, when he spoke, carried nothing of the harshness I had heard for months. "Anna, I don't expect you to forgive me," he began, "but I need you to understand I'm not proud of who I became." She nodded slowly, saying nothing yet. "I thought if I could control everything, I wouldn't lose it," he continued. "I've lived my whole life afraid of people leaving me, and instead of trusting you, I trapped you. I hurt you, and I hate myself for that." His voice cracked on the last word. Anna looked at him for a long time before speaking, not with anger, not with bitterness, just with tired honesty. "I loved you," she said softly, "and I kept giving you chances because I believed you were the same man I married, but I lost myself trying to hold you together." He closed his eyes, tears slipping out. "I know," he whispered, "and I don't deserve another chance. I know I don't, but I'm getting help. I've already started therapy. I need to fix myself, not for you, for me." Anna hesitated, her fingers twisting nervously. "I don't know what the future holds," she said gently. "I don't know if we'll stay together or go our separate ways, but I do know this." She took a slow breath. "I won't allow fear in my home again, not yours and not mine." Mark nodded, accepting those words like a truth he had expected. He didn't beg. He didn't push. He didn't raise his voice. He simply said, "I'm sorry, Anna. Truly." And then he left, quietly, calmly, with a sense of acceptance that made the moment feel complete. Anna watched him walk away. She didn't cry. She didn't break. She just stood there, breathing deeply, as if reclaiming each piece of herself with every breath. When she came inside, she sat next to me and leaned her head on my shoulder, the same way she used to do when she was little and the world felt too heavy. "Mom," she whispered, "I don't know what comes next." "You don't have to," I said softly. "Healing doesn't start with a plan. It starts with rest." She closed her eyes, letting the silence wrap around us like a warm blanket. We stayed like that for a long time. No talking, no rushing, just breathing. Together. In the weeks that followed, Anna grew stronger. She rediscovered her hobbies. She reconnected with friends. She started working on small dreams she had pushed aside for years. And she smiled again. Not those small, fragile smiles, but real ones that reached her eyes. I moved back to my own home eventually, but I visited often, not because she needed me, but because we needed each other. Our relationship grew deeper, not out of fear or crisis, but out of understanding. One evening, as we sat on her porch watching the sun set, Anna took my hand. "Mom," she said softly, "thank you for not walking away, even when I pushed you away." I squeezed her fingers. "A mother doesn't walk away," I whispered. "Even when her child shuts the door, she still waits on the other side." She smiled, tears glistening but not falling. "Do you think Mark will ever change?" she asked. "I think," I said gently, "that people who truly face themselves, who admit what they've done, who choose healing over pride, have a chance. But the road is long, and it's not your job to walk it for him." She nodded slowly. "I know." The sky turned soft shades of pink and gold, the world quiet and peaceful around us. For the first time in a long while, everything felt right. Not perfect, not predictable, but right. As for me, I learned something too. Something I wish every mother, every daughter, every woman could hear. Love is not measured by how much pain you can endure. Love is measured by how safe you feel when you're held, spoken to, and valued. I learned that strength doesn't always look like shouting or fighting. Sometimes strength is the quiet voice that says, "This ends today. I deserve better. I will protect myself. I will protect the people I love. And sometimes, strength is simply showing up again and again for the people who can't speak yet, for the daughters who are afraid, for the families trying to find their way back to themselves. That night when the police knocked on Anna's door, I didn't know what would happen. I didn't know the truth she'd been hiding. I didn't know fear had grown inside that home. But I do know one thing now. The moment you choose to stand, even in the smallest way, is the moment everything begins to change. And sometimes, that is all a family needs.